The gunshot that shattered the morning silence was not what sent Willow Hayes diving behind the overturned wagon, but rather the shadow the bullet cast as it streaked past her head in the dusty California sunlight. Colton Tucker had been tracking a horse thief for 3 days when he found her there, pressed against the splintered wood, eyes squeezed shut, trembling not from fear of the shooter but from something far deeper that he could not yet name. "Miss, you hurt?" Colton called out, his Winchester trained on the ridge where the shot had originated. The year was 1873, and Murphy's, California, had seen its share of trouble during the gold rush years, but those days were fading into memory now, replaced by cattle ranches and the slow march toward civilization. Willow did not answer. She kept her eyes closed, her breathing shallow and rapid. Colton fired 2 warning shots toward the ridge, then moved quickly to her position, his boots crunching on the dried grass of the foothills. When he reached her, he saw that she wore a traveling dress that had once been fine but was now stained with trail dust and torn at the hem. Her dark hair had come loose from its pins and fell in tangles around her pale face. "Miss, whoever that was is gone now," he said more gently, holstering his weapon. "You can open your eyes." "I am not afraid of the shooter," Willow whispered, her voice hoarse. "I am afraid of what comes after, the darkness. It follows me." Colton frowned, crouching beside her. He was 26 years old, tall and lean from years of ranch work, with the weathered face of a man who spent his days under the relentless sun. His gray eyes studied her carefully. She looked to be in her early 20s, and there was something haunted in the set of her jaw, the way she held herself as if bracing for an invisible blow. "What darkness?" he asked. She finally opened her eyes, and he saw they were a striking green, like new grass after spring rain. "Sometimes the darkness follows you," she said, meeting his gaze with an intensity that made him catch his breath. "No matter how far you run, no matter how bright the day, it is always there, waiting for the light to fade." Before he could respond, another shot rang out, this one striking the wagon inches from Colton's head. He threw himself over Willow, shielding her body with his own as splinters rained down on them. He could feel her heart hammering against his chest, rapid as a frightened bird. "Stay down," he commanded, drawing his Colt revolver. He scanned the ridge and caught sight of a figure retreating on horseback. The rider wore a long duster coat and a wide-brimmed hat that concealed their features. Colton considered pursuing but knew he could not leave this woman alone in her current state. When the hoofbeats faded, he eased back, giving Willow space. "Who is shooting at you?" "I do not know," she said, and he believed her. "I have been running for 2 weeks. First in Nevada, then across the state line. I thought I could lose them in the Sierra Nevada foothills, but they keep finding me." "Who keeps finding you?" Willow pushed herself up to sitting, brushing dirt from her dress with shaking hands. "My brother hired men to bring me back. He says I am unstable, that I need to be in an institution for my own protection. But I am not mad. I simply see things differently than others do." Colton studied her face, looking for signs of the instability she mentioned, but all he saw was exhaustion and a deep, bone-weary fear. "What kind of things?" "The shadows," she said softly. "They move when they should not. They reach for me when darkness falls. Everyone says I am imagining it, that grief has broken my mind, but I know what I see." "Grief?" Colton asked. Willow's expression closed like a door slamming shut. "My parents died 6 months ago. A fire in our home in San Francisco. I was the only one who escaped." She paused, her throat working. "I was the only one who saw the shadow move across the wall before the flames began. I tried to warn them, but they would not listen. My brother certainly did not listen afterward when I tried to explain." Colton sat back on his heels, processing this information. He was a practical man, raised on hard work and the simple truths of ranch life. He did not believe in haunted shadows or supernatural darkness. But he did believe in the very real danger of men with guns hunting a frightened woman through the wilderness. "My name is Colton Tucker," he said. "I have a ranch about 5 miles east of Murphy's. You can come there, get cleaned up, have a hot meal. Then we will figure out what to do about these men chasing you." Willow searched his face, looking for deception or ulterior motives. "Why would you help me? You do not know me." "Because leaving you here alone would be wrong," he said simply. "And because I do not hold with men terrorizing women, no matter what excuse they use." After a long moment, Willow nodded. "Thank you. My name is Willow Hayes." Colton helped her to her feet and retrieved his horse, a sturdy buckskin gelding named Copper, from where he had ground tied him 30 yards away. He swung into the saddle and offered Willow his hand, pulling her up behind him. She hesitated before wrapping her arms around his waist, and he could feel the tension in her grip. They rode in silence for the first mile, following a narrow trail through the rolling golden hills dotted with oak trees. The September heat was fierce, but a breeze carried the scent of dry grass and distant pine from the higher elevations. Colton was acutely aware of Willow's presence behind him, the way she flinched at every shadow cast by the scattered trees. "Tell me about your ranch," she said finally, perhaps trying to distract herself from her fears. "It is nothing fancy," Colton replied. 200 acres, mostly cattle with some horses. I run it with my foreman, Marcus, and 3 ranch hands. We supply beef to the mining camps that are still operating and to the growing towns in the valley. It is honest work, hard work. You are not married." The question came out hesitant, as if she feared overstepping. "No, madam. I was engaged once, 3 years back, but she decided ranch life was not for her. She married a banker in Sacramento instead." He said it without bitterness. That heartbreak had faded to a dull acceptance long ago. "I am sorry," Willow said. "Do not be. If she could not love the life I lead, then we were not suited." "What about you? Running from a marriage arrangement?" "No, nothing like that. My brother, William, simply wants control of the inheritance our parents left. If I am declared incompetent and institutionalized, he becomes the sole administrator of their estate. It is worth considerable money from my father's shipping business." Colton's jaw tightened. "So he is willing to have you locked away for greed." "He believes he is doing the right thing," Willow said quietly. "He truly thinks I am mad. Perhaps I am. Perhaps the shadows are all in my mind and I have been running from nothing but my own broken thoughts." "Even if that were true, which I am not saying it is, you would not deserve to be hunted like an animal," Colton said firmly. "Whatever you are dealing with, there are better ways to help someone than hiring armed men to drag them back against their will." They reached the ranch as the sun climbed toward its zenith, turning the sky a hard, bright blue. The Tucker Ranch house was a sturdy structure of timber and stone, built to withstand both the summer heat and the occasional winter storms that swept down from the mountains. A barn, corral, and several outbuildings completed the compound. Several horses grazed in a nearby pasture, and Colton could see cattle dotting the hillsides beyond. A man emerged from the barn as they approached, wiping his hands on his leather work apron. He was older than Colton by perhaps 15 years, with graying hair and the build of someone who had spent a lifetime at hard labor. "Boss, you are back early," Marcus called. Then he saw Willow and his expression shifted to concern. "Trouble?" "Someone was shooting near Dead Horse Canyon," Colton said, dismounting and then helping Willow down. Her legs nearly buckled when her feet hit the ground, and he steadied her with a hand on her elbow. "Miss Hayes needs a safe place to rest. Can you have Rosa prepare the guest room and draw a bath?" Marcus nodded, asking no further questions. He had worked for the Tucker family since Colton's father had started the ranch 20 years earlier, and he understood discretion. "I will see to it. Should I post a watch?" "Yes." 2 men, rotating shifts. "And Marcus, if anyone comes asking about a young woman, you have not seen anyone." "Understood." Marcus headed toward the house, his stride purposeful. Colton guided Willow toward the porch, noting how she moved as if every step required deliberate thought. "When did you last eat?" "Yesterday morning, I think. I had some dried meat in my saddlebag, but I lost my horse 2 days ago crossing a creek. The current was stronger than I anticipated." Inside, the house was cool and dim, a welcome relief from the blazing sun. Rosa, Marcus's wife and the ranch housekeeper, appeared almost immediately. She was a stout woman in her 50s with kind eyes and an efficient manner. She took one look at Willow's bedraggled state and made a soft sound of sympathy. "Poor girl," Rosa said, switching between English and Spanish as she often did when emotional. "Come, I will get you cleaned up and fed. Mr. Colton, you stay down here." Willow glanced back at Colton as Rosa led her toward the stairs, something like gratitude softening her haunted expression. He nodded reassuringly, then watched until both women disappeared down the upstairs hallway. Marcus returned, closing the door firmly behind him. "You want to tell me what is really going on?" Colton moved to the sideboard and poured himself a whiskey, then explained what had happened at Dead Horse Canyon and what Willow had told him about her situation. Marcus listened without interrupting, his weathered face growing more grim with each detail. "Men who would hunt a woman for money are the worst kind," Marcus said when Colton finished. "But if her brother has legal authority, we could be in trouble for harboring her." "I know," Colton admitted, "but I could not leave her out there, Marcus." She was terrified, not just of the men chasing her, but of something else. "She talks about shadows following her." "Shadows?" Marcus raised an eyebrow. "She says the darkness follows her, that she sees shadows moving when they should not. Her brother claims she is mad with grief after her parents died in a fire. She thinks he is using that as an excuse to control their inheritance." Marcus was quiet for a moment, considering. "My grandmother used to say some people see things others cannot, not madness, but a different kind of sight. She called them shadow-touched." Colton had known Marcus long enough to respect his opinions, even when they ventured into territory that made him uncomfortable. "You think there is something to what she is saying?" "I think there are more things in this world than we can explain with simple logic," Marcus replied carefully. "But whether her shadows are real or not, the men chasing her certainly are. That is the immediate problem." The rest of the afternoon passed in tense preparation. Colton positioned his ranch hands strategically around the property with instructions to watch for any riders approaching. He cleaned and loaded all the firearms in the house, knowing they might need them. Then he paced, restless with an energy he could not quite name. When Willow finally emerged from upstairs, Colton almost did not recognize her. Rosa had found her a simple blue cotton dress that fit reasonably well, and her dark hair was clean and braided down her back. Without the layers of trail dust, he could see that she was beautiful in an unconventional way, with high cheekbones and an intelligent, searching gaze that seemed to look through surface appearances to something deeper. "Rosa fed me enough food for 3 people, Willow said, managing a small smile. "I think she fears I might disappear if she stops watching me eat." "She mothers everyone," Colton said. "It is her nature. How are you feeling?" "Better, cleaner at least." Willow moved to the window, peering out at the golden landscape beyond. "Thank you for helping me, Mr. Tucker. I know this puts you at risk." "Colton," he corrected, "and you are welcome. I have been thinking about what you told me about these shadows you see." Willow stiffened, her shoulders rising defensively. "You think I am mad too?" "I did not say that. I am just trying to understand." He crossed to stand beside her at the window, careful to maintain a respectful distance. "You said you saw a shadow move before the fire that killed your parents. Can you tell me more about that?" She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "It was late evening. We were in the parlor after dinner. I saw movement from the corner of my eye, a shadow sliding across the wall near the fireplace. But there was nothing there to cast it, no person or object blocking the light. I stood to investigate, and the shadow seemed to recoil, pulling back into the corner. Then the curtains by the fireplace burst into flames." "Could it have been an ember from the fire?" Colton asked gently. "That is what the authorities concluded. But I know what I saw. The shadow moved with purpose, with intention, and I have seen similar things since childhood. Darkness that pools in corners when it should not, shadows that stretch longer than their sources. I learned not to speak of it because people looked at me as if I were strange, but after my parents died, I could not stay silent. I tried to explain to William, but he would not hear it. He called a doctor, and the doctor agreed I was suffering from delusions brought on by trauma and grief." Colton turned to face her fully. "What if you are not delusional? What if you simply see something real that others do not?" Willow's eyes widened. "You believe me?" "I believe you believe it," he said carefully. "And I believe something frightened you badly enough that you ran halfway across California to escape it. Whether the shadows are supernatural or some trick of light and exhausted nerves, your fear is real. That is what matters." Tears welled in Willow's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. "No one has said anything like that to me since my parents died. Everyone else just looked at me with pity or fear." Without thinking, Colton reached out and took her hand. Her fingers were cold despite the warmth of the house, and they trembled slightly in his grasp. "You are safe here," he said. "Whatever comes, we will face it together." The moment stretched between them, fragile and new. Then Marcus's voice called from outside, shattering the spell. "Boss, we have riders approaching from the west." Colton released Willow's hand and moved swiftly to the gun cabinet, retrieving a Winchester and checking its load. "How many?" "4, maybe 5, Marcus called back. Willow had gone pale. "They found me. I should run, lead them away from here." "You will do no such thing," Colton said firmly. He handed her a small derringer from the cabinet. "Do you know how to use this?" She nodded, taking the weapon with steady hands despite her fear. "My father taught me to shoot." "Good. Go upstairs to the back bedroom. If shooting starts, stay low and away from the windows. Only use that if someone gets past me, understand." Willow hesitated, then impulsively rose on her toes and kissed his cheek. "Thank you for being the first person to treat me like I am not broken." Then she was gone, her footsteps quick on the stairs. Colton touched his cheek where her lips had been, surprised by the warmth that spread through him at the simple gesture. He had known this woman for less than a day, yet something about her drew him in a way he had not experienced before. Perhaps it was the vulnerability she tried so hard to hide, or the strength it took to keep running when the whole world seemed aligned against her. He stepped out onto the porch, Marcus beside him. 3 ranch hands had taken positions around the property, all armed. The approaching riders were visible now, 5 men on horseback moving at a steady pace toward the ranch house. As they drew closer, Colton could see they were well armed, with the look of professional hired guns rather than cowboys. The lead rider raised a hand, calling for his men to stop about 30 yards from the house. He was a tall man in his 40s with a neatly trimmed beard and cold eyes. "Good afternoon," he called. "We are looking for a young woman, dark hair, traveling alone. Have you seen anyone matching that description? Depends on who is asking, Colton replied, keeping his rifle pointed casually at the ground but ready to raise it in an instant. Name is Garrett Meade. I am employed by William Hayes of San Francisco to locate his sister, who left home without permission while mentally unwell. We have reason to believe she came this direction. What makes you think she is mentally unwell? Colton asked. Meade's expression remained neutral. Mr. Hayes can explain his family business to you himself if necessary. Right now, I am just doing my job. Have you seen her or not? No woman has come through here, Colton said, the lie coming easily. But even if she had, I would want to see some proof of your authority before I handed anyone over to armed men. Meade's jaw tightened slightly. I have papers signed by a judge giving Mr. Hayes custody of his sister for her own protection. She is not a criminal, just a sick young woman who needs proper care. Then why do you need 5 guns to bring her back? Marcus interjected. Because she has proven unpredictable and possibly dangerous, Meade replied. I do not enjoy threatening force, but Mr. Hayes is willing to pay well for his sister's safe return, and he will be displeased with anyone who obstructs that goal. Colton felt anger rising in his chest. You can tell Mr. Hayes that this is my land, and I do not take kindly to threats. If I see his sister, I will make sure she gets whatever help she needs, but I will be damned if I turn any woman over to men who chase her through the wilderness like a fugitive. Meade studied Colton for a long moment, and something calculating entered his expression. You are protecting her. She is here. I told you what I told you, Colton said, raising his rifle slightly. Now I suggest you move along before this conversation turns unpleasant. Unpleasant for whom? Meade asked, his hand drifting toward his holstered pistol. His men followed suit, and suddenly the air was thick with tension, violence hovering just below the surface. For all of us, Marcus said quietly, his own rifle now leveled at Meade. But mostly for you and your boys. We have men positioned around this property with clear lines of fire. You might get 1 or 2 of us, but you will all be dead before you hit the ground. Is Mr. Hayes paying you enough to die for his family drama? The standoff lasted several heartbeats, neither side willing to back down first. Then one of Meade's men shifted nervously in his saddle, and the spell broke. Meade's hand moved away from his gun. This is not over, Meade said. I will return with the sheriff and those custody papers. If you are harboring Miss Hayes, you will be the one facing legal consequences. You do what you need to do, Colton replied. But the next time you come onto my land uninvited, you had better be prepared for a fight. Meade wheeled his horse around, and his men followed. They rode back the way they came, and Colton watched until they disappeared beyond the hills. Only then did he allow himself to breathe normally again. That bought us some time, but not much, Marcus said. If he really does have legal papers, the sheriff might have to side with him. Then we need to figure out another solution before he comes back, Colton said. He looked up at the house and saw Willow's face in an upper window, pale and frightened. Something protective surged through him, fierce and unexpected. He barely knew this woman, but the thought of her being dragged back to San Francisco against her will, locked away in some institution because her brother wanted her inheritance, filled him with a cold fury. That night, after posting guards and securing the property, Colton found Willow in the parlor. She sat in a chair near the lamp, but she had positioned herself so she could see the windows and the shadows the lamplight cast on the walls. Her hands were clenched in her lap, and she watched those shadows with the intensity of someone expecting an attack. They will come back, she said without looking at him. And they will have the law on their side. You should let me go, Colton. I can run farther, find somewhere else to hide. Running is not living, Colton said, settling into the chair across from her. You cannot spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, jumping at every shadow. Sometimes the darkness follows you whether you run or not, Willow said softly, finally turning to meet his gaze. I learned that after my parents died. I thought if I could just get away from San Francisco, away from that house and those memories, the shadows would stop reaching for me. But they are here too. They are always here. Have you seen them tonight? Colton asked. Willow nodded toward the corner near the bookshelf. There. That shadow is too deep for the amount of light in the room, and it has been shifting just slightly for the past hour. Most people would not notice. They never do, but I see it. Colton looked at the corner she indicated. To him, it appeared to be a normal shadow, perhaps slightly darker than others, but nothing remarkable. Yet he could not deny the absolute conviction in Willow's voice, the way her whole body remained tense as she monitored it. What do you think they want? He asked. The question seemed to surprise her. Want? If these shadows are real, if they have intention as you described, then they must want something. Do they ever try to communicate? Do they harm you directly? Willow considered this, her brow furrowing. They have never hurt me physically. Mostly they just watch, if that makes sense. And they seem drawn to strong emotions, to fear especially. After my parents died, when I was drowning in grief and terror, they were everywhere, pressing in from all sides. As I ran, as I kept moving, they lessened somewhat. But they never disappear entirely. An idea was forming in Colton's mind, something Marcus had said about his grandmother and people who could see what others could not. What if they are not trying to hurt you? What if they are drawn to you for another reason? What other reason could there be? I do not know, Colton admitted, but I would like to find out. There is a woman in Murphy's, an older Mexican lady named Senora Flores. She knows about herbs and healing, but also about older things, spiritual things. Marcus's grandmother used to consult with her. Maybe she could help us understand what you are dealing with. Willow looked skeptical. You want to take me to some folk healer? Colton, my brother, already thinks I am mad. I will not add accusations of witchcraft to the list. I am not talking about witchcraft. I am talking about getting answers. He leaned forward, his gray eyes intense. Willow, something is happening to you that you cannot explain, and it is tearing your life apart. Would it not be worth trying anything that might help you understand it, even control it? She was quiet for a long moment, her gaze moving between Colton and the shadow she watched so carefully. Finally, she nodded. All right, but if this Senora Flores tells me I need to dance naked under the full moon or sacrifice a chicken, I am leaving. Despite the tension, Colton felt a smile tug at his lips. Deal. They set out for Murphy's before dawn the next morning, taking a circuitous route to avoid any watchers Meade might have posted. Colton brought Marcus along for extra security, and they moved quickly through the still dark landscape. Willow rode behind Colton again, her arms around his waist, and he found himself hyper-aware of her presence, the way she leaned into him as they navigated the rough terrain. The sun was just beginning to paint the eastern sky with rose and gold when they reached the outskirts of Murphy's. The town was already stirring, shopkeepers opening their doors, miners and ranchers moving about their business. Colton guided them to a small adobe house on the southern edge of town, surrounded by a wild garden of herbs and flowering plants that seemed to thrive despite the dry conditions. Senora Flores answered their knock almost immediately, as if she had been expecting them. She was a tiny woman, barely 5 feet tall, with silver hair braided and coiled at the nape of her neck. Her dark eyes were sharp and knowing as she looked from Colton to Marcus to Willow. You bring me someone who walks with shadows, she said without preamble, addressing Colton in Spanish-accented English. Come inside quickly. The morning light protects, but not forever. Inside, the house smelled of dried herbs and something else, something like sage and desert rain. Senora Flores gestured for Willow to sit at a small wooden table, then moved around the room lighting candles despite the growing daylight outside. She studied Willow carefully, occasionally making small gestures in the air that meant nothing to Colton but seemed significant to her. "Tell me when this started," Senora Flores said finally. Willow repeated her story, from childhood sightings to the fire that killed her parents to her flight across California. Senora Flores listened without interrupting, nodding occasionally as if confirming something she already suspected. "You are shadow-touched," Senora Flores said when Willow finished. "Born with sight that reaches beyond the everyday world. It is a gift, though I understand it does not feel like one." "A gift?" Willow's voice was hollow. "This has cost me everything." "Only because you do not understand it, and you fear what you do not understand. The shadows you see are real, child. They are echoes of emotion, fragments of darkness that exist alongside light. Most people cannot perceive them because they lack the sight. You see them because you were born to see them." "Why?" Willow asked desperately. "Why would anyone be born to see such things?" "Because someone must bear witness," Senora Flores replied. "Because darkness unacknowledged grows stronger. You are meant to be a guardian of sorts, someone who can perceive these shadows and prevent them from gaining too much power." Colton listened to this exchange with a mixture of skepticism and wonder. Part of him still wanted to believe there was a rational explanation, but the absolute certainty in Senora Flores's voice was compelling. "Can you help her?" he asked. "Can you teach her to control this sight?" Senora Flores turned her sharp gaze on him. "I can teach, yes. But teaching takes time, and I sense time is something you do not have much of." "Men are hunting her," Marcus explained. "They claim to have legal authority to take her back to San Francisco to lock her in an institution." "Of course they do," Senora Flores said with a trace of bitterness. "The world does not understand women who are different, who have power beyond what men find comfortable. They call them mad, lock them away, silence them." She turned back to Willow. "You must learn quickly then. The shadows are drawn to your fear, your sense of being out of control. When you master your fear, when you accept your sight as part of yourself rather than an affliction, they will trouble you less." "How do I do that?" Willow asked. "First, stop running from them. Face the darkness directly. Acknowledge its presence without flinching. Second, understand that you have power over what you perceive. The shadows cannot harm you unless you give them that power through your fear." Willow looked doubtful. "That is all. Just stop being afraid." "I did not say it was simple, only that it was possible." Senora Flores rose and moved to a shelf lined with jars and bottles. She selected several, mixing their contents into a small cloth bag. "Burn this in your room each night before sleep. It will help calm your mind and strengthen your boundaries, and practice what I have told you. When you see a shadow, stop. Breathe. Acknowledge it without fear. Say aloud, 'I see you, but you have no power over me.'" She pressed the bag into Willow's hands. "This is not superstition, child. This is about taking control of your own mind, your own perceptions. The shadows are real, but so is your power to face them." They left Senora Flores's house as the sun climbed higher, bringing the full heat of the day. Colton could see that Willow was processing everything they had learned, her expression distant and thoughtful. He wanted to ask what she was thinking, but Marcus interrupted with a low warning. "Boss, we have company." 3 riders were approaching from the direction of the main street, and Colton recognized Sheriff Tom Wilson in the lead. The sheriff was a decent man, fair but bound by duty to uphold the law, Behind him rode Garrett Meade and another of his hired guns. "Colton Tucker," Sheriff Wilson called as they reined in their horses. "I need to speak with you about a matter that has come to my attention." "What matter would that be, Tom?" Colton asked, keeping his tone casual even as his hand drifted toward his holstered pistol. "Mr. Meade here has presented me with legal documents granting custody of Miss Willow Hayes to her brother, William Hayes of San Francisco. He has reason to believe you are harboring Miss Hayes on your property." "Is that true?" Colton glanced at Willow, who had gone very still beside him. He could see fear in her eyes, but also something else now, a spark of defiance that had not been there before. "Sheriff Wilson," Willow said before Colton could answer, "may I see these legal documents?" The sheriff looked surprised but retrieved a folder from his saddlebag and handed it down to her. Willow read through the papers carefully, her expression hardening with each page. "This document claims I am mentally incompetent and a danger to myself and others," she said finally. "It was signed by a judge based on testimony from my brother and a doctor I met with exactly once. I was never given the opportunity to defend myself or present my own testimony." "That is a matter for the courts, Miss Hayes," Sheriff Wilson said, though he looked uncomfortable. "My job is just to enforce the legal custody order." "Your job is to protect citizens from illegal detention," Willow countered, and Colton was surprised by the strength in her voice. "Sheriff, I am a 23-year-old woman of sound mind. I left San Francisco of my own free will because my brother was attempting to have me institutionalized so he could control our parents' inheritance. These men have been hunting me for weeks, shooting at me, terrorizing me. Is that legal?" Meade spoke up, his voice hard. "We have only used force to defend ourselves when Miss Hayes proved uncooperative, and we have not shot at anyone, Sheriff. Miss Hayes has a tendency toward paranoid delusions." "I have witnesses to the shooting," Colton interjected. "And even if Miss Hayes were mentally unwell, which I do not believe she is, dragging her across the state against her does not seem like appropriate care." Sheriff Wilson rubbed his jaw, clearly caught between legal obligation and moral discomfort. "Miss Hayes, I am sympathetic to your situation, but I have a judge's order here. Unless you can present evidence that this order was obtained fraudulently, I have to honor it." "Then we will get a lawyer," Colton said. "We will contest the order properly." "But you are not taking her anywhere until we have the chance to present our case in court." "That is not how this works, Tucker," Meade snapped. "The law is on our side." "The law is supposed to protect people, not enable their persecution," Colton shot back. He looked at the sheriff. "Tom, you have known me for 10 years. You know I am not a man who breaks the law lightly. But I am asking you, as one decent man to another, give us time to sort this out properly. If you take Miss Hayes now, we both know she will disappear into some institution and never be heard from again." The sheriff was quiet for a long moment, his weathered face troubled. Finally, he sighed. "I can give you 3 days. That is all. You get a lawyer, present your case to Judge Morrison here in Murphy's. If the judge rules the custody order is valid, then Miss Hayes goes back to San Francisco. But if you can prove it was obtained improperly, then it gets overturned." "Fair enough." 3 days is not enough time," Meade protested. 3 days is what you get," Sheriff Wilson said firmly. "Mr. Tucker is right that this situation needs proper legal review. I will not be part of kidnapping a woman who seems perfectly rational to me, custody papers or not." Meade's face darkened with anger, but he apparently knew better than to argue further with the sheriff. "Fine, 3 days. But if she runs, Tucker, I will assume you helped her, and I will make sure you face consequences for obstruction." "She will not run," Colton said, looking at Willow. "Will you?" Willow met his eyes and something passed between them, a wordless communication built on trust that seemed impossible after such a short acquaintance. "No," she said softly, "I will not run. I am tired of running." The sheriff nodded, apparently satisfied. "3 days, Colton. Make them count." After the riders departed, Marcus let out a long breath. "Well, that bought us some time, but not much. Do you actually know any lawyers?" "There is one in Murphy's, fellow named Harrison Drake. He has helped me with land disputes before. He is honest and smart. Let us hope he is also available." They found Harrison Drake in his office above the general store, a slender man in his 40s with wire-rimmed spectacles and ink-stained fingers. He listened to their story with careful attention, occasionally making notes on a pad of paper. When they finished, he sat back and removed his glasses, polishing them thoughtfully. "This is complicated," he said finally. "The custody order appears legally sound on its surface. However, if we can demonstrate that Miss Hayes is competent and that the order was obtained through false testimony, we have grounds for appeal. The challenge is proving that in 3 days." "What do we need?" Willow asked. "Ideally, testimony from credible witnesses who can attest to your mental stability. A medical examination by a local doctor who can contradict the diagnosis in these papers. Evidence that your brother has financial motives for seeking your institutionalization. Can you provide any of that?" Willow thought for a moment. "I have letters from my parents' lawyer, Mr. Edwards, expressing concern about William's management of the estate, and I can certainly submit to a medical examination. As for witnesses to my character, I have only known Mr. Tucker and his people for 2 days." "Sometimes that is enough," Drake said. "If respectable citizens are willing to testify that you seem perfectly rational and capable, it carries weight. Mr. Tucker, would you be willing to testify on Miss Hayes's behalf?" "Absolutely," Colton said without hesitation. "Good. I will also need to speak with this Senora Flores you mentioned. If she can testify that Miss Hayes came to her for help with nightmares or anxiety, that provides a reasonable explanation for the stress Miss Hayes has been under without supporting claims of insanity." They spent the rest of the day preparing their case. Dr. Emerson, Murphy's only physician, agreed to examine Willow and provide a written assessment of her mental state. He found her to be perfectly rational, if understandably anxious given her circumstances. Senora Flores agreed to testify about their consultation. Marcus and Rosa both offered to speak to Willow's character, describing her as frightened but coherent. By the second day, Drake had assembled an impressive collection of evidence and testimony. He also managed to locate Mr. Edwards, the lawyer in San Francisco, who agreed to send a telegram confirming William Hayes's questionable financial dealings with the estate. The case was coming together, but Colton could see the strain it was taking on Willow. She slept little, spending long hours staring at shadows and practicing the techniques Senora Flores had taught her. Sometimes Colton would find her in the parlor late at night, standing in front of a dark corner, whispering words he could not quite hear. He never interrupted these moments, sensing they were important to her process. On the evening of the second day, Colton found Willow on the porch, watching the sun set in a blaze of orange and crimson across the hills. The shadows were lengthening, but she no longer seemed as afraid of them. She turned as he approached, and he saw something different in her expression, a kind of quiet determination. "Tomorrow we will know," she said. "Yes." Colton leaned against the porch railing beside her, close enough that their shoulders almost touched. "How are you feeling? Scared? Hopeful?" "Angry that it has come to this." She paused. "Grateful to you. Colton, you barely know me, yet you have risked so much to help me." "Why?" He considered the question carefully, knowing his answer mattered. "At first it was just the right thing to do. No decent man leaves a woman in danger." But then I started getting to know you, seeing your strength under all that fear. You have been through hell, Willow, and you are still standing, still fighting. That takes courage. And somewhere along the way, I started caring about what happens to you. Not just as someone I am helping, but as someone I want to know better. Willow turned to face him fully, her green eyes searching his face. I care about you too. I did not expect that. I thought I would be alone in this fight, but you have made me feel less alone than I have in months. Colton reached out and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle as they intertwined with hers. Whatever happens tomorrow, you are not alone. Even if the judge rules against us, we will figure something out. You cannot fight the law forever, Willow said softly. If we lose, you need to let me go. I will not let you destroy your life trying to protect mine. Let us not talk about losing, Colton said. Let us talk about what comes after we win. A small smile played at Willow's lips. And what comes after, I do not know, he admitted. But I would like to find out. I would like to see you smile without fear behind your eyes. I would like to show you the high meadows in spring when the wildflowers bloom. I would like to spend time with you when you are not running or hiding, when you can just be yourself. Willow's breath caught slightly. Colton, you know what I see, what I deal with. The shadows may never fully leave me. Can you really accept that? I accept you, he said simply. The shadows are part of your life, so they become part of mine. We will face them together. She leaned up and kissed him then, soft and tentative at first, then with growing warmth. Colton wrapped his arms around her, pulling her close, and for a moment the whole world seemed to narrow to just the two of them on that porch, the setting sun painting everything gold. When they finally pulled apart, both were breathing hard. Willow rested her forehead against Colton's chest, and he could feel her heart racing. No matter what happens tomorrow, she whispered, thank you for giving me this moment, for making me feel like someone worth fighting for. You are worth fighting for, Colton said fiercely. Never doubt that. The hearing took place the next morning in Judge Morrison's chambers. The small room was packed with interested parties. Willow and Colton on one side with Harrison Drake, Garrett Meade on the other with a lawyer who had arrived from San Francisco the night before representing William Hayes' interests. Sheriff Wilson stood by the door, and Judge Morrison, a stern-faced man in his 60s, presided from behind a heavy oak desk. The proceedings were tense from the start. William Hayes' lawyer, a slick-talking man named Baxter, presented the custody order and the supporting medical evaluation, arguing that Willow was clearly incompetent and that her brother was acting in her best interests. Then Drake began presenting their case. Dr. Emerson testified that Willow showed no signs of mental instability. Marcus and Rosa spoke to her rational behavior and kind demeanor during her stay at the ranch. Senora Flores carefully explained how she had counseled Willow on managing anxiety and nightmares following trauma, framing everything in terms that sounded reasonable and medical rather than mystical. When Willow herself took the stand, she spoke clearly and passionately about her brother's financial motivations and his refusal to listen to her after their parents' death. She described the terror of being hunted across California, of having her sanity questioned simply because she grieved differently than others expected. Finally, Drake introduced the telegram from Mr. Edwards detailing William Hayes' questionable handling of the estate funds, suggesting a clear financial motive for having Willow declared incompetent. Baxter tried to counter by returning to the themes of delusion and paranoia, but Judge Morrison cut him off. I have heard enough, the judge said. Mr. Baxter, the evidence presented here raises serious questions about the validity of the original custody order. Miss Hayes appears to me to be entirely rational and capable of managing her own affairs. Furthermore, the financial irregularities suggested by Mr. Edwards's testimony provide a compelling motive for why Mr. William Hayes might seek to have his sister institutionalized. Your Honor, you cannot simply overturn a judge's ruling based on a few character witnesses, Baxter protested. I can and I will when the situation warrants it, Judge Morrison replied sharply. The original evaluation was based on a single consultation with a doctor who, I note, is employed by Mr. William Hayes's shipping company. That constitutes a clear conflict of interest. In light of the evidence presented here, I am ruling that the custody order is invalid. Miss Willow Hayes is to be released to her own custody immediately, and I am issuing a protective order against Mr. William Hayes and his agents. They are not to contact Miss Hayes or come within 100 yards of her person unless she initiates such contact. The relief that washed over Colton was so intense it left him momentarily dizzy. Beside him, Willow had tears streaming down her face, but she was smiling, genuinely smiling for the first time since he had met her. Baxter looked furious, and Meade's expression was dark with anger, but there was nothing either could do. The judge had ruled, and Sheriff Wilson was already moving to enforce the protective order. Outside the courthouse, Willow turned to Colton and threw her arms around his neck, laughing and crying at the same time. We won. I cannot believe we won. You won, Colton corrected, holding her tight. You fought for yourself and you won your freedom back. Harrison Drake joined them, looking pleased. Miss Hayes, I will file additional paperwork to ensure your brother cannot attempt this again in another jurisdiction. You should also consider pursuing legal action against him for mismanagement of the estate, though that is a separate matter. One battle at a time, Willow said, wiping her eyes. Right now, I just want to breathe again. They returned to the ranch, and that night they celebrated with a dinner that Rosa had prepared with obvious joy. The ranch hands joined them, raising glasses of whiskey to toast Willow's victory. It was a simple celebration, but it felt profound to Colton, watching Willow laugh and talk with genuine ease, the constant tension finally gone from her shoulders. Later, when the others had retired, Colton and Willow found themselves alone on the porch again. The night was clear, stars scattered across the black sky like diamond dust. A half-moon hung low on the horizon, painting the landscape in shades of silver and shadow. What will you do now? Colton asked. You are free to go anywhere, do anything. Willow was quiet for a moment, looking out at the dark hills. The shadows are still here, she said finally, but they seem different tonight, less threatening. I practiced what Senora Flores taught me during the hearing. When fear tried to overwhelm me, I acknowledged it without letting it control me, and the shadows receded. So her advice is working. It is helping. I think she was right that my fear was feeding them, making them stronger. As I learn to manage that fear, they have less power over me. Willow turned to look at Colton, her eyes reflecting the moonlight. I would like to stay here if you will have me. Not forever necessarily, but until I figure out what comes next. I need time to heal, to learn more about my sight and how to live with it, and I need time with you. Colton felt his heart lift. You can stay as long as you want, forever if that is what you choose. Forever is a long time, Willow said, but she was smiling. Then let us start with tomorrow and see where it leads, Colton replied. He kissed her again under the stars, and this time there was no desperation or fear behind it, just warmth and promise. When they finally pulled apart, Willow rested her head on his shoulder, and they stood together watching the night deepen around them. The darkness follows everyone, Willow said softly, but maybe it does not have to be something we run from. Maybe it is just part of the balance, light and shadow existing together. I like that, Colton murmured, and I like having you here to help me see things differently." The weeks that followed were among the happiest of Colton's life. Willow settled into the ranch as if she had always belonged there, helping Rosa with household tasks, learning about the cattle and horses, spending long hours reading in the parlor or walking the property with Colton. She continued to see shadows, but as Senora Flores had predicted, they troubled her less as she learned to acknowledge them without fear. She and Colton grew closer each day, their conversations ranging from practical matters of ranch life to deeper discussions about fear, loss, and hope. Colton found himself fascinated by the way her mind worked, how she saw connections and patterns that others missed. Her shadow sight, as Senora Flores called it, gave her a unique perspective on the world that enriched his own understanding. They worked side by side during the day, and in the evenings they would sit together on the porch or in the parlor, sometimes talking, sometimes just enjoying the comfortable silence that existed between them. Colton had never felt this way about anyone, this sense of rightness and completion. Willow had carved out a space in his life that he had not known was empty until she filled it. One evening in late October, nearly 2 months after the hearing, Colton took Willow up into the hills to watch the sunset. They rode double on Copper, Willow's arms wrapped around his waist, her cheek pressed against his back. He had packed a blanket and some food, planning a simple picnic, but his real purpose was to ask her a question that had been building in his mind for weeks. They stopped at a high meadow where the grass was still green despite the approaching winter. The sun was beginning its descent, painting the sky in brilliant shades of pink and orange. Colton spread the blanket, and they sat together, eating bread and cheese and watching the light change. "Colton," Willow said suddenly, "I need to tell you something." He heard the seriousness in her tone and turned to give her his full attention. "What is it?" I heard from Mr. Edwards. "He managed to untangle the estate finances, and it turns out my inheritance is substantial, more than I realized. I could buy property of my own, start a business, do anything I want." She paused, looking down at her hands. "I could leave here and make my own way." Colton's chest tightened. "Is that what you want?" "No," Willow said, meeting his eyes. "What I want is to stay here with you, but I need to know that you want that too, and not just because you feel responsible for me or protective of me. I need to know this is real for you. Real." Colton took her hands in his voice rough with emotion. "Willow, you are the most real thing that has ever happened to me. These past 2 months have been the best of my life. I wake up each morning grateful that you are here, and I go to sleep each night thanking God that you chose to stay. I love you. I think I started loving you that first day when you told me about the shadows, when you trusted me with your truth." Tears welled in Willow's eyes. "I love you too. I was so afraid to say it, afraid that if I admitted how much you mean to me, something would happen to take you away. I have lost so many people." "You are not going to lose me," Colton said fiercely. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold ring that had belonged to his mother. "Willow Hayes, will you marry me? Will you build a life here with me, face whatever darkness comes together, and let me spend the rest of my days showing you how precious you are to me?" Willow's answer was to launch herself into his arms, kissing him deeply as tears streamed down her face. When she finally pulled back enough to speak, she was laughing. "Yes, yes, absolutely yes." Colton slipped the ring onto her finger and it fit perfectly, as if it had been made for her. They held each other as the sun set completely, painting the world in shades of twilight before full darkness fell. But the darkness did not frighten Willow anymore. With Colton beside her, she could face any shadow. They married in early November at the small church in Murphy's, with Marcus and Rosa serving as witnesses, and most of the town turning out to celebrate. Even Senora Flores attended, giving the newlyweds a blessing in Spanish and pressing a small bundle of herbs into Willow's hands. "For protection and prosperity," she said with a wink, "and perhaps for fertility if the spirits are willing." Willow and Colton honeymooned at the ranch, which was the only place either wanted to be. They spent their days working side by side, and their nights learning the intimacies of marriage, discovering each other with tenderness and passion. Willow's shadows still appeared occasionally, but they no longer controlled her life. She had learned to see them as simply another part of her reality, no more frightening than wind or rain. As winter settled over the hills, bringing cold rains and occasional dustings of snow at higher elevations, Willow and Colton made plans for their future. They would expand the ranch, perhaps add more cattle or develop the horse breeding program Colton had always wanted to pursue. Willow suggested using part of her inheritance to build a proper guest house and bunkhouse, improving conditions for the ranch hands. She also began corresponding with Senora Flores regularly, learning more about her shadow sight and how to use it constructively rather than simply enduring it. Senora Flores suggested that Willow might be able to help others who experienced similar phenomena, becoming a bridge between the everyday world and the deeper mysteries most people never perceived. One night in January, almost a year after Colton had first found Willow hiding from her shadows, they lay together in bed discussing these plans. Snow was falling outside, rare for Murphy's but beautiful, muffling all sound and making the world feel small and intimate. "You ever regret it?" Willow asked softly. "Taking in a strange woman with unexplainable problems. Your life would be simpler if you had left me in that canyon." Colton pulled her closer, pressing a kiss to her forehead. "My life would be emptier. Simpler does not mean better. You have made everything richer, Willow. You have taught me to see beyond surface appearances, to question assumptions, to be braver than I knew I could be. I would not trade that for all the simplicity in the world." "I feel the same way about you," Willow said. "You saved my life, but more than that, you gave me a reason to stop running and start living again. You believed in me when no one else would." "I will always believe in you," Colton promised. They fell asleep entwined together, and for the first time since her parents' death, Willow slept deeply and dreamlessly, with no shadows reaching for her in the darkness. Spring came to the California foothills in a riot of wildflowers and new growth. Colton kept his promise and took Willow to the high meadows to see the flowers, and she wept at the beauty of it, overwhelmed by how much her life had changed in a single year. They made love in the soft grass under the warm sun, and Colton thought he had never been happier. In May, Willow discovered she was pregnant. The news filled them both with joy and a certain amount of nervous excitement. Colton immediately became protective, wanting Willow to rest more and work less, but she laughed and reminded him that pregnancy was not an illness. Their son was born in January of 1875, during another rare snowfall. They named him Samuel, after Colton's father who had founded the ranch, and from the moment Colton held the tiny, squirming baby, he understood a new dimension of love he had not known existed. Willow proved to be a natural mother, patient and devoted, though she sometimes worried about whether Samuel would inherit her shadow sight. "What if he sees them too?" she asked Colton one night as they watched their sleeping son. "What if I have passed this burden to him?" "Then we will teach him what you have learned," Colton replied. "That sight is not a curse but a gift, and that with the right support and understanding, he can live a full and happy life. And he will have both of us to help him, which is more than you had when you were young." As Samuel grew, it became clear that he did indeed have some of his mother's sensitivity, though it manifested differently. He was unusually perceptive for a child, able to sense emotions and moods with uncanny accuracy. But he did not seem frightened by shadows or darkness the way Willow had been. With parents who understood and supported his unique perspective, he learned early to see his abilities as natural rather than aberrant. 2 years later, Willow gave birth to a daughter they named Clara. She had Colton's gray eyes and Willow's dark hair, and she proved to be a happy, fearless child who delighted in everything. Clara showed no signs of shadow sight, but she adored her older brother and followed him everywhere, creating a bond between the siblings that warmed their parents' hearts. The ranch prospered over the years. Colton and Willow became respected members of the Murphys community, known for their hospitality and fairness. Willow did eventually begin helping others who struggled with unexplained perceptions or fears, working quietly with Senora Flores to provide understanding and support. Word spread slowly, carefully, and people began to seek them out, finding in Willow someone who understood experiences that others dismissed as madness. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Colton took Willow back to the high meadow where he had proposed. Their children were staying with Marcus and Rosa for the night, giving the couple rare time alone together. The meadow was just as beautiful as Colton remembered, carpeted with wildflowers and bathed in golden afternoon light. "You remember what I said to you that first night?" Willow asked as they spread a blanket and sat together. "About darkness following me." "I remember everything about that night," Colton replied. "I was so afraid then, afraid of the shadows, afraid of being alone, afraid of what my life would become." She turned to look at him, her green eyes bright with emotion. "You changed all of that. You showed me that darkness and light exist together, that I do not have to run from one to embrace the other. You gave me a home, a family, a purpose. You gave me love." Colton cupped her face in his hands, struck as always by how beautiful she was, especially when she smiled. "You gave me those things too. Before you, I was just existing, going through the motions. You made me truly live." They kissed as the sun began to set, painting the sky in familiar shades of fire and gold. When they finally pulled apart, Willow laughed, the sound pure and joyful. "What is it?" Colton asked. "I just realized that I have not thought about my shadows in days, maybe weeks. They are still there, I can still see them when I look, but they no longer control me. They are just part of the landscape now, no more frightening than the hills or the sky." "That is because you are no longer running from them," Colton said. "You are standing still, rooted here with me, with our children, with the life we have built. The darkness cannot chase someone who is not running." "Sometimes the darkness follows you," Willow said softly, echoing those words from so long ago. "But sometimes, if you are very lucky, you find someone willing to face that darkness with you, someone who teaches you that you were never really alone. And sometimes," Colton added, pulling her close, "you find that the darkness was not the enemy after all. It was just waiting for you to stop running long enough to realize that you are stronger than any shadow." They stayed in the meadow until full dark, watching the stars emerge one by one across the black velvet sky. When they finally rode home through the moonlit night, it was side by side. Two people who had found in each other the courage to face whatever darkness or light the future might bring. Years passed, and the Tucker Ranch became legendary in the area, not just for its prosperity but for the love that infused every aspect of life there. Samuel grew into a thoughtful young man with his mother's insight and his father's steady strength. Clara became a spirited young woman with a gift for horses and a fierce loyalty to her family. More children followed, 3 more sons and another daughter, filling the house with noise and laughter and the beautiful chaos of a large, loving family. Willow never fully lost her shadow sight, but she learned to use it as Senora Flores had suggested, helping others who struggled with similar experiences. She became known as a wise woman in her own right, someone who could bridge the gap between the everyday world and the mysteries that lay just beyond normal perception. People came from all over California to consult with her, and she helped many find peace with abilities they had thought were curses. Colton supported her in this work, as he supported her in everything, proud of the way she had transformed her greatest fear into her greatest strength. He ran the ranch with the help of their older children, expanding the operation until it became one of the most successful in the region. But no matter how busy they became, he and Willow always made time for each other, still taking rides into the hills, still spending evenings on the porch watching the sun set, still facing each day side by side. On their 25th wedding anniversary, surrounded by their children and grandchildren, Colton raised a glass of wine and made a toast. "To my wife, who taught me that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is stop running, who showed me that love is not about perfection but about acceptance, who gave me a life richer than I ever imagined possible. I love you more today than the day I found you hiding from your shadows, and I will love you more tomorrow than I do today." Willow stood and kissed him to the cheers of their family. "And to my husband," she said, her voice strong and clear, "who saw me at my lowest and never once looked away, who faced my darkness with me and showed me how to find light, who gave me everything I never knew I needed. I am the luckiest woman in the world because you chose to believe in me." As the celebration continued around them, Willow caught sight of a shadow moving along the wall, dark and sinuous, but she did not flinch or fear it. Instead, she simply acknowledged its presence with a small nod, then turned her attention back to her husband and the beautiful life they had built together. The darkness had followed her, as she had always known it would. But it turned out that darkness was not the end of her story, merely a part of it. The real story was about finding someone who would walk beside her through both light and shadow, who would hold her hand when fear threatened to overwhelm her, who would remind her every day that she was stronger than any challenge she might face. The sun set over the California hills, painting the ranch in shades of gold and purple. Children played in the yard, their laughter rising like music. Cattle lowed in distant pastures, horses nickered in the corral, and somewhere a coyote sang to the emerging stars. Inside the house, warmth and light and love filled every corner, driving back any darkness that might try to enter. And in the middle of it all stood Colton and Willow Tucker, their hands clasped, their lives intertwined, living proof that sometimes the darkness follows you not to destroy you but to lead you toward exactly where you need to be. Sometimes, the very thing you run from is what brings you home. And sometimes, when you are brave enough to stop running and face your fears, you discover that love has been waiting for you all along, ready to light your way through any shadow into a future brighter than you ever dared to dream.